طيب السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. يعني would like to welcome my dear باشمهندس طاهر Abdel-Ghani is an assistant lecturer at New Giza University. My dear friend, يعني thank you for accepting our invitation to let us enjoy this presentation. I would like to يعني thank you for this kind acceptance, and I hope our students to enjoy your talk today, from city to screen to text, Re-Culturalization of Cinematic Urbanism. And I hope they benefit from this inspirational presentation, inshallah. Welcome, Shwant Tahir, and you can start now your presentation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Muhammad, for the invitation. Can you give me the share permission, please?
Okay. All, it's okay. You can share.
Okay. I also share with the sound.
Yes.
Okay, so can you see my screen now?
Yes, but the sound is flicking a little bit.
Okay, how about now?
It's fine. Okay, you can stop.
Okay, I will try to keep the mic very close to my mouth, because that's the only way it works.
Okay.
And yeah,
Okay.
I will just.
I will mute myself to make the sound more clear. Okay.
Okay.
You
I'll
can go
just
on.
ask your permission. I will close my camera for internet issues. Okay. So first, thank you so much, Dr. Muhammad, for the invitation. Well, I was intrigued by the course that you are going to teach this, or you're teaching this semester, about the relation between architecture and cinema. And this is something I've been working on for the past maybe since 2014, 2015. And so I work on both sides, like from the academic perspective, like I write about it, and I also make short movies, and some of them were also like they were screened at different festivals around the world. And for the past 5 or 6 years, I've been in the academic industry. Now I'm an assistant lecturer at New Giza University in Cairo. And I teach also like a variety of courses in design and history, arts and culture, and so on. And my mission is always about how I can bring this idea of cinema into the design output that the students do on every semester. So before I begin, this is basically my premise is about learning through questioning. My idea is that we never reach a certain answer. We always question something. We ask one question that leads to another question that leads to another question. So basically, I always have this notion that the more we question, the more we learn. But not finding answers, not for the pursuit of finding answers. Answers will come by themselves. So the first question that I want to ask, a very basic question, and it's very simple, yet it may seem, but it's kind of complex. What is the difference between the word cinema and the word films? And is it the same difference between architecture and buildings? Well, here I want to give it a more of a philosophical approach, and refer to two authors, Michel Foucault and Manuel Castells. Foucault was talking, had an essay back in '68 called "Of Other Spaces," where he was discussing the idea that space is considered the dominant feature in our lives. We have become involved in space and associated with space in everything we do in our daily lives. And so space as a philosophy and as a culture is very important to us. It's not just the physicality of it. It's also the core philosophy of it, the idea of space itself. And Manuel Castells was talking about the space of flows in the digital era and how everything is changing rapidly. And due to globalization and changes of economic features like capitalism or whatever, and of course changes of the technology and the digitalization of tools that we have today. So together we kind of ask ourselves, how can we picture architecture in this materialistic space of buildings, and how we can do this even though space is dissolving into a universal flow, even though like the idea of flowing, how everyday mobility is part of something that is changing rapidly and on a daily basis. And I think this is the idea, that when we want to differentiate between cinema and films or between architecture and buildings, we look more on the process and not the product. We look more into the idea of how things move inside, or the sequence of events happening within the film or within the building process itself. And when you look at the sequence, you look at the small details and the small cultural details in historical and political details, the everyday infrastructure. Once you look at this, you find that you can start to differentiate a bit between these two terms. So, for example, let's say in cinema, let's go back a little bit in time. Well, not a little bit, like a lot in time. And we have something called the nine muses of Greek mythology, and these are like the nine different forms of art. And art at that time was something called a recording art, something that you see live. Like, for example, history, someone was telling a story live in front of you. Dancing or singing was live. Poetry was live. Music was live. But later on, there was photography and film and writing, where actually writing was was before that, but film and photography came on later, and these were called the representational art, and they had a certain form of abstraction that spanned across several fields, like the practical field or the environmental or pictorial, dramatic, narrative, or musical. This is taken from a book called How to Read a Film. It came out in 2000, and the author was claiming that film, as an art form, it combined, or it can span across all of these six spectrums. It has a practical and has an environmental part, which is the context. It has a pictorial, of course. This is the strongest part of it, the pictorial. The dramatic, of course, how it conveys drama, and how the narrative. There's a lot of storytelling and fictional non-storytelling and inside in cinema, and musical, of course, with using music and using performance, dance, body movement inside cinema as well. And so cinematic space became a taxonomy of representational art. It's not just a space that you think of, or something that you use. No, it's something that you are part of. This is a sort of a mental space. You think from a cinematic point of view. You can design spaces from a cinematic point of view. You can start like looking at places around you, cinematic. which leads us to the next question. So why cinematic space? Why do I need this cinema? Why is it so important, this cinematic space? But in other words, we can ask sub questions like why do we design, and why do we need to film? Why do we need to document what we design, or why do we need to document our the environment or the context that we live in? And here I want to show you a trailer from a clip or a trailer from a movie that was in 2008. I think it was a Chinese movie.
从中发挥了深知的惩罚技巧，即将告别生活战斗的50年的
你要的东西太贵了，哪一个要得起哦？
它原来是一个飞机发动机修理厂，那个司令部的对美帝国主义作战的。
现在上班都允许化妆啊？
当然可以，外企不化妆。
咱们这个办公室将来就是一个5星级的酒店。
咁么东亚人当起来之后呢，上海人就到市区来了。那抗战胜利之后呢，搿点人就算是抗算是东征了。因为现在人家已经天天吃辣，咁么算是四川登过来。哦。
24城它是来源于一句古诗：“24城芙蓉花，景观自戏称繁花。”这边是一个1期放大的模型，这边看吗？
谢谢。你家有人在420厂吗？
就那个，有，我爸爸妈妈都在里面。
你进去过吗？
没有。
So this movie is like partial documentary, partial fiction, and it's called 24 City. And but it's a true story, but it's like a semi documentary kind of style. And it's about this factory called Factory 420, and it will be demolished and replaced by the project called 24 City, which is like a complex of hotels and luxury apartments and so on. And of course, all these people will be displaced and their places will be demolished. And this is an image that I found very interesting on the left. It reminded me of Metropolis, the movie Metropolis, which is a very old silent movie in 1927 by Fritz Lang. It was a German film. And you can see like the workers are going into like they're entering the city to start working for the people living in the rich part of the city. And so here we talk about history and memory. And memory is the key word here. And I want to quote from a book that says, "We speak so much of memory because there's so little of it left." And this is the idea that what cinema does. cinema, you can say that it has this idea of collective memory, and in the film, the whole film is about interviews with the Chinese workers um, before it was demolished right away, and it was like a documentation of their experiences in the factory, of their memories, and all what they experienced during their working days in the factory, because some of them worked for decades actually. So we're talking about several generations working in this factory. Um, and so yeah, we when we say when we look at a movie like this, you can see that it's not just a living memory. No, it's also a historical consciousness, and this is what these people have. They are very conscious about the history of the place. It's like being transforming from the site to the site, from site of memory, which is SIGHT, to site SITE. So site is from the vision itself, and seeing the aesthetics of memory, to actually living the memory, the place of the memory itself, the experience of it, the site as SITE, the location itself where everything happened, and how films actually can document these transformation phases between what happened and what will happen. So how is design related to memory, and how we as architects can think about memory and associate it in our work as designers? So here I will refer to some of the starchitects, and I call them starchitects because they are considered like the Hollywood stars of, they're called starchitects for a reason. They're the Hollywood stars of architecture, and three of them actually had or were inspired by cinema in their work. So you have Rem Koolhaas, you have Jean Nouvel, and you have Bernard Tschumi. For Rem Koolhaas, he was actually a screenwriter, and he had like he was part of a film movement called 123 Group, and he used to be a filmmaker, and he used some of his filmmaking skills in his graduation project in AA school that was in 1972 in New York. It was called Exodus for the Voluntary Prisoners of Architecture, and his project was like a mixture of collages, surreal images, and it was more of like a political projection of architecture. The idea of the wall. He was picturizing and visualizing the wall itself as an element, as a political element back in history, and how different forms of power used it, whether it's top-down power or top-down or bottom-up power, used it or utilized it to convey certain political actions. And for him, the city is an addictive machine from which there is no escape. So he, in his book Delirious New York, he was exemplifying this, because for him, the city was a huge machine, and we cannot escape it. We are in this loop that does not end, and it's become sort of an obsession. We become obsessed with the city. We become obsessed with the rapid globalization and the rapid expansion of cities. And he furthered this argument in his documentary called Lagos Koolhaas. It was in 2002, where he went to Lagos, a very growing informal city, to document there and to document the people living there. And it it was a manifestation of his ideas of the mega city. And on the left, you can see this is the youthful movie club that he had. It was called 123 Group, and here he is looking very young at the time. The second one is Jean Nouvel, and he was a scenographer at some point. He used to design stage scenes, and he also had an affiliation to become a painter. He admired this he wanted to become a painter. So he had this mixture of art and cinema as well. And he said that architecture exists like cinema in a dimension of time and movement. And one thinks concedes and reads a building in terms of sequences, like a movie. Exactly, it's like a sequence of events, sequence of frames. And his building it was built in 2000, the Lucerne Culture and Congress Center in Switzerland. It had this sort of continuity. You can see like the colors, the materials, and all the spatial continuity that he had was more had this inspiration of cinema, of film sequences, and also as well, like he had several other projects that that were inspired by cinema as well. And the third one, which is actually one of my favorites, is Bernard Tschumi. He had a very interesting book called The Manhattan Transcripts, and if you haven't read it, please read it, and please read about Bernard Tschumi. He was like the person or who pioneered the idea of movement of body inside the space. And for him, buildings were more of an that started with an idea and with a concept before the 3D form itself. So for him, if there is no event happening inside the space, there is no building. And he was inspired by Sergei Eisenstein. Sergei Eisenstein was a Soviet filmmaker back in the 1910s, and he was considered like the godfather of the Soviet montage theory because he had an editing technique, or he actually was like the father of the modern editing technique that we see today. He was the one who started it, and how this editing can construct a story. So what you see here, this is taken from the Manhattan Transcripts, from the book by Bernard Tschumi. So to him, events lead to movements, and movements lead to objects and buildings. So how you can, from the movement of the body, you can construct 3D models and methods around this movement and around the bodies moving. And the bottom one, like the bottom picture, is Sergei Eisenstein's theory of the montage. And you can see how every frame by frame has the musical score and has the composition or the patterns of the image, and has the movement pattern as well. So you have these three layers, same as Bernard Tschumi. These two were very inspired, like Tschumi was very inspired by Sergei Eisenstein's way of editing. And both of them were talking about the idea of movement and how the narrative took place and how the characters move within the frame. So it's not just, so the viewer is not seeing just a moving image or just moving images in front of him or characters moving in front of him. No, he's also part of this movement. He's part of the space, the narrative space, the space where the narrative takes place and moves from one frame to the next. So the key word across all these three architects is actually the word movement. And I want to show you another clip from the movie Blade Runner, the old Blade Runner, 1984, the one that had Harrison Ford, not the new one. And I'll show you the very famous scene. It was shot inside something called the building called the Bradbury Building. It's existing. It's not fictional. But this is how the idea of movement took place inside this building. So because this movie was set in the future and sort of like a dystopian setting, so you can see how the cinematography showed, and the lighting, of course, showed how this building was in sort of ruins. And here, the character Harrison Ford, he's looking for like certain types of human like creatures, the replicas, what they call them, to hunt them down. And I mean, maybe you've seen the new one, but this was the original one that was it was 1984, and it was set in Los Angeles, and Los Angeles was kind of the ruined mega city that has no future, very bleak, and yeah. So this is how the filmmaker constructed space through this building, actually. You can see the details of the doors and the corridors. So if we want to like see the idea of space and the idea of movement, we can go also back in time and to the idea to also the Greek mythology, like Plato, for example, who coined the term hora, and hora means the middle space between physical bodies and ideas. We know there's physical bodies and we know there's ideas, but we don't know what happens in the middle. There's a transition space that people don't really pay attention to. And next, his companion Archytas, he said that space is different from matter. It is quite conceptual and it's very abstract, and it can span across time and space. But it's not bounded by any physical boundaries. It's bounded by the infinite world. So there's no boundaries. There's no boundaries to space. And Aristotle said that space is actually the relationship between body and object. So here we talk about movement, but also we talk about the transition space between one entity and the other. There's a threshold side, the threshold or the liminal kind of space between body and object. And this takes us to the next question, which is, can we, as architects, urbanists, filmmakers, or artists, or whatever, can we perceive buildings and films as intangible entities? Can we visualize the spatial factor in these in these elements, in buildings and films? Can we actually do that? Let's go back a bit to 1997, July 1st in Hong Kong, when it was declared to be independent from the British colonial force, which stayed there for like 150 years. And Hong Kong at the time was quite chaotic, and it was in a confusion state because it was in this transition zone between a British entity, and now it's become an Asian entity, or a totally Asian entity. But still, they don't know, or like you had generations, they don't know which identity are they. Are they British, or are they Chinese, or are they, what are they exactly? And people were in sort of lost, and the language was still not fully developed. Like the English is still, yeah, the English is developed, but even the language itself, if when you go there, you don't know exactly are they Chinese, or are they English, or they have a mixture of identity, sort of like an identity crisis or existentialist crisis. And one movie that came out in 1994 called Chungking Express. It came out 3 years before the independence because the filmmaker wanted to show this state of confusion at the time. I recommend everybody to actually watch this film. It's by Wong Kar-wai, which was one of the very famous filmmakers today. So Chungking Express It's a it's like it's a movie that is divided in two parts, two stories. They're completely not related to each other, but they convey uncertainty of time, and they convey the idea of confusion. The characters are in a state of flux and a state of you know unaware of what's going to happen. It's a very there is no events. There are no events in the movie. It's more of abstract kind of narrative. And you have two stories. The first story is a cop who was he's a police officer uh, who broke up. He experienced a recent breakup, and he entered into a superficial relationship with a woman, with an Asian woman who smuggles fake passports for immigrants and so on. And then the second story is also is a police officer, but another police officer, and he also experiences the breakup, and he falls in love with this restaurant worker who is very fascinated about traveling, and she wants to go to US and wants to experience the world and so on. So this is the woman that he falls in love with. She's very into traveling, and she's very into her own world. She has this sort of identity crisis, and there's a lot of use of reflections, mirror reflections in the movie to show or like to question, for the characters to question their very identities. Who is this person, or what's this context that we live in? And there are two architectural elements in this film, or architectural semi-urban elements in this film that are manifested very well in the narrative, in the story, and they're used quite vividly. The first is called chunking mansions. Chunking mansions, as you can see, is like a complex of brutal buildings, in a brutal style, swamped together like that. And these are all very small apartments. All of them are immigrants. They're all immigrants. They're nationalities from all over the place. And of course, it's all very low income kind of space. And it's a very imagery, a very image representation of postmodernism, or the social crisis of the postmodern age. I will show you two clips that took place inside this mansion and around it from the movie Chungking Express. So this is the woman that smuggles fake passports to immigrants, and you can see like they're all from all over the place. And they actually live like they're stuck together in very small apartments. This is the intro of the movie, and you can see how it's very uncomfortable to just walk through these corridors. And this is the actual this was the filmmaker's intention to do, because he wanted to show how Hong Kong was very swamped with people at the time, in a liminal, confusing kind of state. The next scene is from the cop who actually later on in the movie falls in love with this woman. Also, this is in the intro.
一个警察，我的名字叫做何志武，编号2223。咩啊？你走啦，行開
！He's chasing someone, and you can see the technique.
會咪走啊？ 我 们最接近的时候，我跟他的距离只有0.01公分。57个小时之后，我爱上了这个女人。
Here he was saying that the distance between me and her is 0.01 centimeters, and later on I will fall in love with this woman. So you can see the kind of confusion and like the technique, how the cinematography and the colors actually show this kind of chaotic environment. And so this is how it looks like in real life. Like, as you can see, it's very brutal and very chaotic and very overwhelming to look at. The second architectural manifestation is something called the central mid-levels escalator. So this is an escalator that goes through central Hong Kong, and it's quite long. It actually connects all the way to like the central to the I think it extends through the whole central of Hong Kong, and on the sides you can find stores, you can find houses, you can find small shops where you can it's like a whole service space in itself. And adjacent to this, it takes place the second story of the movie, where you have the second cop who experiences another breakup. This is his apartment on the right, and on the left, this is the escalator where his ex-girlfriend takes to her work. So this is called the threshold site. This space, this escalator, is a representation of this transition zone that's happening in the city of Hong Kong between what happened and what will happen, which is actually not known at all. And then comes this character that he meets in a restaurant. She's a restaurant worker, and while he's at work, she kind of is obsessed with him, and she goes to his apartment and starts fooling around inside his apartment. That's his apartment, and she just takes an airplane because she dreams of traveling around the world. So here another scene is it's like how this escalator is not just it's not just a service area. No, it's an in-between space of emotions. It has emotions. It embodies the emotions of the characters, and it's also a refuge from the vastness of the city. And after the breakup, the cop couldn't sleep at night, and so she goes into the apartment and starts fooling around and starts to put sleeping pills inside inside his drinking water. So every day she does the same thing. So the escalator is becoming now, or has become a character in the film. So this, when you think about physical objects or physical architectural elements or urban elements, it embodies also the intangible part, or it can embody like the spatial factor of the buildings or the city, and as well as the film narrative itself. And this leads me to another sub question. how do we as architects perceive the word representation? I've one of the things that I search for is in my work is what is the meaning of the word representation? When we say this represents this or this represents that, what does that mean? And why did I specify the word reculturalization in the title and not the word reconceptualization? Because I mean, it has several. I mean, it has it's a long story actually, but we can here for the time being, we can just focus on the idea of movement, the word movement. With Starkitects, the idea of movement and memory was sort of individualistic. It's a sort of like a commodified art. They treated memory, or in my opinion, they treated memory as sort of something that you can buy or something that you can exchange it as part of a global exchange system. It was very individualistic that represented or visualized their own ideas and their own vision. But there's the question of, did it represent a bigger or a wider spectrum of people? Did it represent culture? Did it represent history? Did it represent politics? What about the idea of this threshold site, the transition zone between the visual or slash the text and the collective memory? Or collective mnemonic memory. Mnemonic is it's a tool that aids, or it's a tool that aids in retrieving memory. So if you want to remember something, there are specific tools to remember this object or remember this subject. So this is called mnemonic. It's called mnemonic memory. So where is this idea of movement? Where is this culture, and where's this history, and where's this politics? Where's this social part of movement? Where can we find it? In my opinion, we can find it in our own context, in the Arab region. And one of the very famous examples of this is Naguib Mahfouz. His stories, all his novels, they portray the idea of space and idea of movement. And I guess you've read some of his works, but you haven't. If you haven't read the Cairo trilogy that he wrote, Palace Walk, Palace of Desire, and Sukaria, and they were all adapted to films, Egyptian films, but they were quite old, like in the 1960s. So if you can find it online, good. If you cannot, I can send you a link to find them. So what's the story behind it? This is a trilogy that spans across 3 or 4 generations during the British colonization of Egypt, from 1914 till late 1940s. And and through the 3 films, you see a patriarchal family, and it expands to the 2nd and the 3rd generations. And as the story continues throughout these 3 films, you see Cairo transitioning from the traditional kind of city to a modern kind of city. And you see that this city, this mega city, Cairo, is stuck in between these two. Is it a traditional city, or is it a more modernistic slash contemporary city? And it's manifested also in the characters. Some still hold on to their traditions, and some characters, like the one we will show, is a believer of modern values and associates himself with some modern meanings and ideas and intellectuals. So it's Cairo in this film was kind of the viewer gets the idea that it's a very chaotic but complex but a confused city as well. So Naguib Mahfouz had several like threshold sites that I see in his stories and later on in the films. For example, the alley, or al-hara, how they call it, and the alley is very dominant in his stories. It's in his novels, the alley is it's like it's a embodiment of the whole world, of the whole universe. Everything that you want to everything or anything that you want to understand about society, you can find in the alley. You can understand it through the alley. In in the first movie, for example, you have the alley having two roles, the same space having two roles. One role that takes place in everyday life, like a local cafe, people walking, someone who's bypassing a woman. And then the second one is the second frame is the same space where people are protesting against the British colonization during the times of Saad al-Ghul. So this is actually an interesting point of view of the alley and how this space embodies two different roles. The same space embodies two different roles in the same narrative. In the second film, you have the house. These are two different houses. One that is traditional, the traditional house where they live in, and another house appears later in the film, which is more modern. It's the typical modern Cairo houses that appeared as a result of the British colonization. This new modern luxurious lifestyle of you can see the Western columns, the chairs, the white stucco walls, the piano. All of this appeared in a very changing lifestyles from the British, and how a new generation in Cairo adopted this westernized kind of lifestyle. And here the house or the movie, when they portray the houses, you can start having ideas about colonization and decolonization. Is the house colonized, or are the characters colonized, or is it space that is colonized? So if space is colonized, does that mean that the characters are colonized itself? So these are kind of questions that you can take into consideration, the idea of how films can decolonize your vision of space, or the other way around, it can colonize your vision of space. Which continues to the third movie, Sukaria, where this character, as you can see, he's the one from this family member who has this sort of semi-modernized existentialist kind of views on life. And he starts to meet all sorts of characters, and he starts to live separately from the rest of the family. He has his own bedroom, his own office work, because in the previous films he wanted to be a teacher, and teaching at that time was not considered to be a privileged job. It was very low looked upon. So it wasn't really highly respectful, but he wanted to be a teacher, so that's why he was considered to be the odd one out from the family. So the family dynamics change, as well as the spatial dynamics change on the urban level, as well as on the architectural level. From the traditional house, where you had people, the family members living together in one space, and one space can have different functions, to the modern houses that we live today, where everything is separate by walls and all the functions are separate, and sometimes the characters also are separate. So continuing the diagram, the importance of visual analysis and the importance of movements, how culture and history and social parts and the political part takes place in the narrative, can contribute to collective memory, and so it can contribute to the visual culture of cinematic space, and how we should reculturalize the idea of cinematic space. This is why I wanted to put the idea of reculturalization. I'm not talking about the concept of space, so it's not just the mere conceptualization of space, it's the culturalization of it. It's how our culture can be different from other cultures when talking about cinematic space and when talking about space in general. space usually, okay, plays a dominant role, or like the protagonist in the movies, but sometimes in local cultures you can say, okay, it's part of the characters as well, and it's part of their own mental characters as well. It's or like mental image, part of their visions, part of their personality and their psychological well-being. This might not seem to be the case in more Western movies. In the Western, it could be mere physical space, or it could be a character in the movie, but it emerges from, like I said in the Starchitect's part, that it emerges from a commodified vision, more of a commercial art or a very contemporary globalized art, but it might not be an embodiment of the local or the detailed culture that is represented in the people, in their history, and in their social factors as well. And here comes like my final slide and the final question that I want to ask. Can we, as architects or filmmakers, consider movement as a cultural factor in our output? And this I would, maybe if we have other chances to give another lecture, this could be part of the educational process, which is you as students, you can be architects and you can be filmmakers, but you can consider memory and movement as cultural factors in your design products. Can you consider it not just as an end product, not just as a mass, not just as a form, but also as something that continues and lives on and expands and in you know in that changes every day with the changing factors that we face every day. And in the end, I always keep saying these are just theories and points of view. We can debate, so you can have another opposing point of view. It's up to you. And I'm always intrigued to know other people's interpretations. And I'm always continuing to build on the existing ideas that I already put. So thank you so much again, Dr. Muhammad, for the invitation. And yeah, let's hear from the students now. I think I cannot hear you, Dr. Muhammad. Is it muted or?
You hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Just the mic turned off. So thank you, Tahar, for this, and it's very inspiring and rich presentation. And Yani, I have a lot of points that we can discuss, but I just wanted to thank you for the intro when you started discussing and presenting the first question is cinema relationship.
I think the sound went off again. Sorry.
It's working now?
Yes.
Okay. I was just talking about your first question at the beginning about the relationship between cinema and films and architecture and buildings, similarly. And if my students remember, in our first lecture, we were tackling the same point when we were trying to find description or definition for architecture. And we mentioned that sometimes we talk about architecture as a end product, as buildings or as a built environment, and sometimes we talk about the process to create this built environment. So this recalls this question and brought it back to the floor. I want to just highlight some points through the presentation, just to keep our students with us and on the same floor. You tackled some points, and I think architecture is one of the most rich fields that concerns a lot of disciplines, a lot of sciences, a lot of aspects that are integrates to, or should integrate together to create this environment that we live in, what we call built environment. And again, we were talking about that we are creating spaces for people to practice their activities within, either to work, sleep, and to live. And as we are designing for people, this human being is consisting of different aspects. So we have the body, the soul, the spirit, and we have the social interaction between people and each other. So all these aspects integrates together, works together to create this human being. And in architecture, we need to consider these aspects. We need to consider philosophy. We need to consider music, art, cinema, and even the natural science in our study. So this is very important, and you tackled some point from this perspective about the relationship between cinema and architecture. I want to highlight that you highlighted some important rules that cinema can play to serve our work, our field as architecture. For example, by documenting the history or recalling the memory, and not just recalling the memory as the static memory, but to help us to relive in this memory. And this is a very interesting point. One of the common or shared aspects that how we can perceive or understand the space or the different types of spaces. It's not just the container that we live in, but also the intermediate spaces, the transitional spaces, and the interaction spaces, and how these spaces could be perceived from the cinematic perspective and or in our field. Some of the shared topics you highlighted is the issue of identity. It's one of the topics that is thoroughly discussed through a lot of cinematic works. And also in architecture and urbanization, we discuss the issue of identity, how to enhance the identity, how to create it, how to understand the identity of a certain place. And as we have shared topics, so we can benefit from each other as architects and cinematic people, to learn from each other or to help each other to understand, to imagine, and to work together to enhance this environment. One of the topics that discussed in both fields is the role of AI, role of artificial intelligence. And I can say that in cinema, this topic started to be discussed too much earlier than in architecture. And cinema was a leading driver for a lot of inventions in the area of AI, because writers and directors were dreaming about the future.
Yeah.
And what they were dreaming about in the past, scientists and architects started to try to achieve it later on. So they lead in this space. Also, the discussion of a lot of social issues like the gender equality, a lot of titles that we hear about in the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, were discussed by a lot of cinematic works earlier. Also, we tackled the point of the techniques used in cinema to understand a certain space, to understand a certain relationship, and how this could help us as architects to يعني develop our work. The background of architects and this rich background, like when you discussed the background of Re-Culturalization and how his cinematic backgrounds, and I would highlight another example, but not from cinema. It's the works of Calatrava, Santiago Calatrava. His structural background impacted his architectural imagination and inspiration. So, and if my students recall when they were presenting some examples for architects, and I asked them, please go and study the history of this architect and to try to understand the impact of what of his background and history on his work. And you tackled this point very well. Thank you for presenting the case of Najib Mahfouz, because it's one of the impressive examples. It has a lot to say about you discussed several points on how he explained the development of the community and the city through the Trinity, and the live recall of the memory, and discussing the different rules of the urban space, and the urban space is introduced very well in Najib Mahfouz work. I usually give this example when he explained in one scene how Amina was standing behind Mashrabiya, and he was describing what she is seeing through this Mashrabiya of the alley and the street. Okay, and if you try to sketch or draw what she is observing or watching, you will not see a still image. You will see that he described a complete life. When you start from a very far point and the landmarks that you pass through when you see through your journey. So he explained or described this complete journey in one shot. None of the architectural documentaries or people working in documentation, the physical documentation of the heritage, none of these works will give you this image, will give you this imagination of the place and how people were living in this place, or what you can see or observe from different points of view. Okay, so the cinematic art, or maybe even the writings of several artists could help you to build this complete imagination rather than seeing the facades and elevations and plans and these dead or still images. Another similar example is the work of Dan Brown. Dan Brown is the writer who wrote Da Vinci Code. I think some of our students either read rare a very few number read the novel, but maybe some of them saw the film, the movie of Da Vinci Code, and there is Angels and Demons and Inferno. 3 of his works was translated into cinematic movies, and through these movies he was discussing and presenting a lot of philosophical issues, and the use of the spaces or the buildings to accommodate these scenes or movies were selected very carefully to represent the idea of or what ideas or thoughts he wanted to present. So also cinema here helped a lot in representing the thoughts of the writer, but through a built environment that was designed or created by architects or urbanists previously. So there is this interrelation between the two fields. Cinema cannot create a good work without a container, without this built environment that helps to represent the ideas and thoughts. This is the role of architects, and also the architects need a cinematic perspective to help them to develop and imagine the built environment in a better way. So thank you very much. You highlighted the very good points. I hope you can join us, inshallah, later for another presentation, and I hope you can join us in the evaluation of the work of our students regarding the interrelation between architecture and cinema. I don't know if anyone has any other remark or question. Shabab? Okay, so I would like to thank you, Tahir. Shukran jazeelan. We will share with you, inshallah, the outcomes of our amazing students and to discuss their product, inshallah. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much, Doctor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.